Saving the Amazon. Brazil's president vows to reverse the destruction of the Amazon. Can he save the world's biggest rainforest? What's at stake for the world if he can't? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. When Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva returned to power in Brazil on the 1st of January, he promised to end the deforestation in the Amazon, something that surged under his predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro. Well, 100 days in, new data underscores the scale of the challenge he's facing. Government satellites show 322 square kilometres of Amazon rainforest were destroyed in February, a 62% increase on last year. Earlier this week, Lula announced plans to host a regional summit in August to renew the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization to promote the sustainable development of the Amazon basin. But is political will enough to end deforestation? What are the implications of the destruction of the Amazon? Plenty to discuss, but first let's take a closer look at the world's largest rainforest. Well, it stretches across South America from the Atlantic Ocean on the east coast to the foothills of the Andes Mountains. It spans 9 countries, but 2/3 of it is in Brazil. It's one of the most biodiverse regions on the planet, home to millions of species of insects, plants, birds and wildlife. The Amazon absorbs more greenhouse gases than any other tropical forest. But scientists estimate that in the past 50 years, the Brazilian Amazon has shrunk by about 20%. Lula is credited with reducing deforestation during his first presidential term in the early 2000s. Logging fell 70%, down from its peak in 1995, when more than 29,000 square kilometres were destroyed. Lula expanded programs for protected areas and enforced environmental laws. In 2019, when Jair Bolsonaro took office, deforestation skyrocketed. He opened up large parts of the Amazon to business, loosened development regulations, cut spending for environmental agencies, and weakened indigenous land rights. During his 4 years in office, 45,500 square kilometres of trees and plant life were razed to the ground. Let's bring our guests into the show now. We have joining us from the Brazilian city of Belo Horizonte, Karla Mendes, an award-winning investigative reporter with environment conservation news site Mongabay. In Sao Paulo, Ana Carolina Alfinto, the Brazil legal advisor at Amazon Watch, an NGO that advocates for the protection of the rainforest and the rights of indigenous peoples in the Amazon basin. And in London, we have Michael Jacobs, Professor of Political Economy at Sheffield University. He served as a climate change advisor to former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown. So a warm welcome to you all. If I could start with Karla. So Brazilian authorities are vowing to protect the rainforest, the Amazon, and they're announcing new initiatives. Are they heading in the right direction, though, Karla?
Hey, thanks for the opportunity to talk about such an important topic. Yeah, no, the moves we've been seeing during the Lula government really strengthen enforcement and oversight in the Brazilian Amazon is key to tackle deforestation and destruction that you've seen in the last years, especially during the term of the former president. And one thing that we've been following is that since Lula took office, he promised to bring deforestation to zero. He issued a bunch of measures. And the good thing is that we are seeing the results. The data from the government released recently, for example, showed that fines for deforestation increased more than 200%. We saw also the increase of seizure of goods related to deforestation. But of course, we can be innocent and think that all the trail of destruction from the last years will cease immediately in a fast way, because the bandits have been acting for years. But to me, they are in the right track.
All right, well, and the kind of the facts kind of bear that out. Anna, deforestation still continuing at an alarming rate, despite all the progress which Karla was mentioning there by the government, by President Lula da Silva. In the first quarter of 2023, we witnessed the second highest level of deforestation since records began. Why?
Well, I think it's crucial to mention that, the Bolsonaro regime, it has been called a forest burning machine, and it was a forest burning machine, and it has left to its successor a legacy of rising deforestation, human rights violations, emptied out administrative institutions that are supposed to control and to enforce environmental and human rights legislation, regulation in the Amazon. So what the Bolsonaro administration left behind, it has a long-term effect on deforestation. We can't expect.
So it's going to simply take time to undo all of this legacy, Anna?
So it's definitely going to take some time, doubtless, because it's a whole government apparatus that needs to be reconstructed, but it's also going to take a new vision, and a lot of effort, a lot of investment, a lot of political strength, and of rebuilding political culture in the Amazon and in Brazil as well for this to happen. So it's not only about time. Yes, we need time, but we need a complete restructuring and a completely new project for what the Amazon region is today in the Brazilian and in the global economy as well. We cannot consider and see the Amazon anymore as a space for extractivism, or extraction of primary goods to export to the global economy. As long as this exists, we will continue to see deforestation, biodiversity loss, human rights violations in the Amazon.
That is a very important point. Hold that thought for a second, because you mentioned a really important point on a new vision. Michael, are we seeing a new vision, particularly as it relates to international cooperation on protecting the Amazon, when, for example, we look at one of the initiatives the Brazil government is doing is this conference in August to try and rally members of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization to renew their commitment to protecting the Amazon. Is that a return, is that a move towards something new, or a return to simply the policies of the past?
Well, I'd call it a renewed vision. It isn't new in the sense that when President Lula was last the leader of Brazil, he tried very hard to not only implement policies domestically, which would slow the rate of deforestation, but also to gather together an international coalition, including northern countries who could help provide finance. Norway in particular, but also other countries provided quite a lot of finance. And all of that was ended by Jair Bolsonaro. And so what President Lula is now trying to do with this summit, which he's called in August, is to renew what he was doing before. But after, as we've heard, some terrible years in which deforestation has been accelerated. And it's very important, the international cooperation, but it's also important to explain it in the right terms. People in the north of the world quite often refer to our Amazon and this being the lungs of the world. And of course, it is absolutely true that the Amazon is vital for the whole world, but it belongs to the countries in which it's located, Brazil, but also the other Amazon countries in South America. And it is up to them what they do about it. What they've asked for, what Lula has asked for, and will no doubt ask for again at this summit, is international support, both financial support, but also support in not buying illegal products from illegal deforestation. So that's what this new conference will be about this summer.
And briefly, Michael, is he going to get that international support? What's the global appetite like in the post-COVID world?
Well, money is limited. People in the north are struggling with the cost of living crisis, inflation, and so on. But I think countries will want to support Lula in this. It is important for the whole world that the Amazon is protected. So I think he will find a lot of support. And I think organizing a summit at which he's inviting other leaders, and I know that President Macron of France will be going, is important to galvanize that support. And getting the world's media behind this is also important. So I think this is a very clever thing to do, to organize a summit so early in his new term of office.
All right, Karla, rallying international support may be one thing. Is he going to have to rally some domestic support, perhaps even battle with Congress if he wants to toughen forest codes and widen protected areas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. To me, the international and national support, they are key to really carry out the targets, the goals to protect the Amazon. And of course, the funding is something really important. A good thing that we saw is that in the first day that Lula took office, that Norway, for example, released the funds that were frozen during the Bolsonaro administration for the Amazon Fund. That's a key project to fund projects and in the Amazon and protect the biome. And having the entire world connect with Brazil in this war, because it's a war of destruction, is really important because most of the commodities from Brazil are exported. And it's really important also to make accountable the buyers, because these products connect to illegal deforestation. They are exported mainly to the United States and to Europe. So we do need to track supply chains and make accountable and bring the importers to have responsibility in the products they are buying from Brazil and require more transparency, because if you don't do these actions in all parts of the supply chain, we won't succeed to halt deforestation.
That kind of brings us to an important point. Before I go to Anna, I want to bring Michael back in. It's not just public government funding that is needed here, right? We need to look at private funding. Is there a role, is there a way to disincentivize international financing for production, for activities that is basically destroying the forest?
There's definitely a role for disincentivizing companies to buy products from illegally deforested areas of Brazil, but also of Indonesia and Central Africa, where there are also rainforests that need to be protected. And this is something that consumers can do in the north of the world, in the Middle East, which is to say, we don't want to buy, we won't buy products from illegally deforested areas. And then to put pressure through that and through campaigns on the importers of these commodities. It's completely right that Brazil's task is to try and prevent the illegal incursions into the rainforest, but it is the rest of the world's responsibility not to provide the demand for those products. So yes, there's a really important role for countries and for consumers and businesses in the world outside Brazil.
That sounds like a lot of change which will take time. Anna, can Lula fulfill his campaign promise to achieve zero deforestation by 2030? We're not that far off.
Well, this is definitely a Herculean task. And if he wants to do this, again, it's crucial. I mean, we've been talking about several sectors and levels of, policy and markets that contribute to how the Amazon is being deforested today. So, of course, Lula will not be able to do this on his own. He needs the cooperation of international states. We need a lot of research and accountability on companies who have been importing the goods that are illegally extracted from the Amazon. But we also need a very big reshifting and recasting of policy. So what we see is that today, even in Lula's third administration, the idea of development that has been so detrimental to the Amazon and its people still permeates the state. So this is a conception of, the idea that the Amazon is underdeveloped, that it needs to be the stage of large infrastructure projects and large-scale extractivism. So we still see this.
Anna, are you talking about this integration of the regional infrastructure of South America initiative, or ERA, as I think it's called?
So, of course, this is one of the initiatives, but it's one of them. I mean, a recent study by the Social Environmental Institute, ISA, in Brazil, shows that almost 400 indigenous lands will be impacted by federal government projects and infrastructure, including road construction, railroads, hydropower plants. So this is in the hands of the state. There are many projects, licensing procedures that are active today that will contribute to the destruction of the Amazon, to its forests, its peoples. And this has to be critically shifted. As I mentioned before, we need a new vision. This vision is already present in the forest. I mean, there are indigenous peoples, traditional communities, rural reform settlements that harbor the seeds of what a new project for the Amazon is. And we need the state to listen also to these, to these peoples, to these communities, and to foster other ways of building the Amazon, of protecting the forest, together with the forest peoples.
Karla, are we seeing the Lula administration make those changes which Anna is talking about in the developmental initiatives for the Amazon?
Well, there are several projects that are still from the past government that were precisely trying to put under threat indigenous territories and protected areas. So there is a battle in Congress to reverse part of these projects. And in terms of, you mentioned about indigenous people, and to talk about protection of the Amazon, we cannot talk about indigenous people because they are the best guardians of the forest. This can be seen several studies that prove that. And even when we look at satellite data, we see that the areas that are demarcated indigenous lands or protected areas, they are really an oasis in the middle of this. So demarcate indigenous lands in another important move. And this is something that also during the Lula government, he's been restructuring FUNAI, that's the Indigenous Affairs Agency. We have Joênia Wapichana, who is an indigenous. She was the first woman congresswoman at the forefront. And there is a long way there too, because all these indigenous
and yet, though, Karla, we
agencies
still have plans to build dams and federal highways like that from Porto Velho to Manaus and so on, which we're told will very much threaten the Amazon, right?
Yeah. No, unfortunately, this infrastructure projects are still going on. So it's really key to have national and international outcry to halt this. There is precisely today, I read there was a project in Bahia that's not part of the Amazon, but where we have the Atlantic forest, that there was a huge project of a resort that would be built there and destroy the forest. There was this huge mobilization, right. The federal government halted it. So it's key. We cannot be silent behind this, and also in the Congress.
Anna, do indigenous communities want these kinds of projects, though? Because I've read that on the one hand, obviously, they don't want the destruction of their habitat, but they're desperate for a way out of poverty.
Well, they're desperate for having the opportunity to continue to exist on the earth, right? And so I think it's really, when we talk about what are the implications of Amazon destruction, we need to remember that the Amazon is not only forest and trees, it's people, it's communities. And the destruction of the Amazon is equatable to an eco-genocide. I mean, the indigenous movement has been talking a lot about this over the past years. The destruction of the forest is the destruction of ways of life, a possibility of existing on Earth for a myriad of communities. And so many of them are on the forefront, in the front lines of resistance against mega projects, against developmental projects. And so I want to bring up one case, which is the Belo Monte hydropower dam in the Big Bend of the Xingu River. Belo Monte was like a watershed in Lula's past administration, the construction of this massive hydropower dam, which everyone knew would destroy this specific and very biodiverse region in the world. Today, the renewal of the operation license of Belo Monte sits again with the Lula administration. This is the irony of destiny. The whole region, this very bio and cultural diverse region, is under threat because it's dry today, because its water has been taken away from it in order to generate clean energy, which is not really clean energy. The region is also threatened by the opening of a new gold mining frontier in a Canadian corporation called Belusam, which wants to license an open pit gold mine in this region of eco-destruction. And so we need a federal administration that takes very strong and strategic stances also in these regions of imminent environmental collapse to show the world that the Amazon is not a sacrifice zone for extractivism, that we need a rule of law in these places, that the voices of indigenous peoples and traditional communities will be heard, and that their no will be respected.
Michael, is there a way to do both, to have your cake and eat it, to provide development, but also look after the rainforest and help lift indigenous people out of poverty? Because you look at the studies, you know, they say on the one hand, you need to connect these communities with the international commerce system. You need to give them power. But if you build dams, that's going to cut off the water going into some of these communities. If you build roads, according to one study, well, it found that 95% of deforestation occurs within 5.5 kilometers of a road. Seems like a rock and a hard place situation. Does any country have we can draw on a good example or past experience on achieving both?
It is extremely difficult. And there's something very ironic about asking somebody like me from a northern country, which used to have a lot of woodland and forest land. The United Kingdom used to be covered by woods and forests and now isn't. And the reason it isn't is that we chose 200 years ago, 300 years ago, to cut down our forests, create agricultural land, and then move people into the cities to become an industrial economy. And that's why the UK is rich, along with, of course, the colonialism that enabled us to take resources from what we now know as the global south and institute a slave trade and so on. So the model provided by the currently rich countries is not a good one. We got rid of our forests in order to develop, alongside some other really terrible things. There are, however, some countries in the global south now which have managed to increase their forest cover. Costa Rica, for example, which has found a way of increasing its forest cover while also developing. And yet there have been conflicts between indigenous people and other poorer people in Costa Rica and their government. And there will always be these very difficult conflicts between the people who live on the land and other people who want to see their incomes rising. And I think outsiders like me and many other commentators and politicians outside Brazil need to be very careful about how we talk about what Brazil must do. Brazil now has a new government elected by the people, but with a very small majority. So there are a lot of people in Brazil who oppose Lula, but he has committed to supporting indigenous people. He's created a new ministry for indigenous people, which hasn't existed before. And he and the Brazilian people are going to have to negotiate their way through to a form of development which can protect the rainforest, protect the rights and the livelihoods of indigenous people, while also enabling Brazil and Brazil's poorer people elsewhere to raise their income. So this is a really difficult challenge for any developing country.
It is a big challenge. Absolutely. Karla.
It's absolutely a big challenge.
Karla, to what extent is deforestation fueled not only by human activity and human development, but also climate change? I know this is kind of a tricky question because climate change in itself obviously is linked to human activity too, but it is another big driving force now, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is, for sure. And climate change connects to all the destruction that is being done, and we can see the effects of desertification of several areas in the Amazon and other Brazilian biomes. And we can see this affecting, for example, the seasons. I heard I'm constantly in contact with indigenous groups, and they all report the effects of it and their livelihood, that it usually to rain during certain month. Now it's not happening. When it happens, we see floods. By the way, in the last weeks, there was a horrible situation in Acre, that's a state in the Brazilian Amazon. It faced a very serious flood. So a lot of people and communities were facing this bad situation. So this shows
Karla, has it become a vicious cycle now where climate change is fueling deforestation, but deforestation is also fueling climate change and so on and so forth? We hear about deforestation undermining the rain recycling process, but that also undermines the forest growth.
Yes, no, exactly. Unfortunately, it is became this cycle that is repeating not only in the Amazon, but in the cities, not only in Brazil and elsewhere. We see these floods and all this landslides, destruction, and calls our attention that more than ever we need to act to protect nature, because it's a reaction. The human being, they destroy nature and the nature reacts with this bad effect to us.
Right. Well, I think we've just got about a minute and a half left. So, Anna, what's the bottom line? Not only for the survival of indigenous communities, but for the world. I mean, you look at some of the papers published in the Journal of Science talking about deforestation happening at a rate which is faster than the ability of people and species to keep up with, to adapt to. Is life at stake here?
Life is certainly at stake. The life of all of humanity is at stake. Specific forms of life that are being exterminated on a day-to-day basis are at stake. Biodiversity is at stake. Life that we don't even know exists is already at stake. So Lula urgently needs to show the world that his commitment to the Amazon goes beyond words. We need the urgent demarcation of protected territories, of indigenous lands. We need land reform. We need to remember that the Amazon is made up of a mosaic of different types of communities and peoples that need different types of protection policies, and they need to be strengthened in their will to fight against global extractivism in their homes.
All right, I think we've got a brief 30 seconds. Michael, when we say life at stake, this is not just life in Brazil or the Southern Hemisphere, right? This is a global issue.
It's a global issue because climate change does not distinguish between where people live. It's going to happen and is happening now all over the world. And it is the poorest people in the world who are suffering the most and will suffer the most. So the commitment that Lula has made in Brazil needs to be matched by the commitments of other countries with major contributions to greenhouse gas emissions, not necessarily through deforestation, but through their energy use, their transport, their agriculture, and so on. So this is a responsibility which lies on the shoulders of all the leaders of the world, the United States, Europe, the Middle East, and elsewhere, China and India, and so on. And it's something in the end which the peoples of all the world, of all these countries, must accept is going to be part of our commitment over the next few years. And it's urgent.
All right, on that call, we'll end the show. Thanks so much to our guests for making this a brilliant discussion. Karla Mendes, Ana Carolina Alfinito, and Michael Jacobs. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.